So this is it. And I'm not going to focus on insignificant changes where it's just a word here or there. I've only focused on the ones that I think we really would be interested in knowing about. So let me page down so that you can see what's interesting here. Let's keep going. We know this is only going to be published in August of 2022. So let's keep going. Let's keep going. Interestingly, down here, we have animal feed. So previously we only had pet food. We always said that feed is a big deal. It's got all its own legislation. It's huge, and it was always excluded from the scope of the standard. Now it's included in the scope of the standard. Let's keep going. Here, under senior management commitment, they focus on behaviors. So they've given a little more guidance there, and they've said it must include behaviors, because without the right behaviors, can't get the right culture. I get that. Previously, we used authenticity and integrity, the two words interchangeably. The idea was if a business had integrity, their products were likely to be authentic. They've taken that out and they've just stuck with authenticity as the word, which is good, I think. Page down. I'm not always going to give my interpretation of whether a change is good or not. I should leave that to you. Organization structure. This is awesome. This is awesome. So they've included all staff. Previously it said relevant staff shall have access to relevant documentation. I used to really struggle with this auditing. Staff wouldn't have access to procedures, and the site would say, yeah, well, they can ask their team leader. Their team leader's got access to all the procedures. Yeah, and it's a get around, isn't it, the previous wording. Now it says all staff, all employees shall have access to relevant documentation so they can do their job. I really like that. Plus they can request access to an assessment for training, so training plans. So staff can say, I'd like to see what training I need. Yeah, they can request an assessment of training needs for the job that they're doing. I like that. Let's keep going. Insignificant changes where I haven't made any comments, or insignificant in my view. Don't hold me to that. You might have a different view. When it comes to HACCP, validation. They put the focus on validation, which is in line with the Codex General Guide for Food Hygiene, Codex HACCP, that was updated to revision 5 in 2020. So that's good, because that put focus on validation. So it's not just step 11 is no longer just verification, it's validation and verification, and rightly so. And BRC always had only one other key difference from the Codex Guide, and that was the extra review step that they put in at 214. They've taken that away, which is great, because step 11 was always a review. It always incorporated a review to check that HACCP is working. So that's good. So that's the review step gone. And let's keep going. Nothing there worth worrying about. What was it here? Internal audits. Yes, internal audits must include an audit of culture. Well, we know that it always had to include everything related to implementing the standard anyway, which would have included culture, but giving it extra focus there. And here, in addition to the internal audit, yes, of course, these are regular GMP inspections, and they've just added a bit more focus on those GMP inspections, also needing to be reported for the personnel responsible, corrective and preventive actions, etc., and reported to management review. So a bit more focus there on GMP audits. We always had to, and now we're looking at 3511, which is the big risk assessment on all our raw materials. And yes, we have got to now not only be aware of raw materials subject to legislative control, but also subject to customer requirements. And down here, we always had the 3 options. You can approve a supply based on GFSI certification or an audit, or a questionnaire, that is still true, but they've increased the scope of that audit if you're going for that option 2 to include VASIP and TASIP, or you might not call it that, but essentially authenticity and security. Moving down, 3523, receipt of live animals. Used to be a clause here. For some reason, they've just deleted it rather than striking it through, but it does show up later. So hang on, because we've got a brand new section on animal conversion, which is slaughter. So that's coming up anyway in a different section. We always had to approve suppliers of services, and they've added on consultants there, product safety consultants. If you use consultants, you've also got to formally approve and monitor their performance. Suppliers of services, there's a focus on performance review, so a bit more focus there. And performance review, outsourced processing. This is not changed. They've just explained it better, that it is always only an intermediate process that someone else does for us. That's what outsourced processing is. But previously, there was outsourcing, which is subcontracting, but subcontracting, which is either 100% you subcontract out manufacture to somebody else, or you might subcontract out the packaging process, for example. In both cases, the product doesn't come back to the site, or if somebody else made it entirely and then comes to site, you're just treating them as a supplier of the product. Either way, it's not an intermediate process, in which case the focus is on approval of them as a supplier, just like you'd approve any other supplier of product. So that's quite good. It's clarified that relationship between outsourcing the intermediate process and just buying product from an approved supplier. Okay, and moving down. Yep, that's the VASIP and TASIP again. Okay, and let me just go up, apologies, let me just go up a little bit here. That was internal audits, that was supplier approval. Yes, with the VASIP and TASIP scope. Moving down. Okay, here we go. 352, receipt of live animals, we've covered outsourced processing, we've covered, yes, of course. So that's where I got to, I got a little confused there. Yes, so how do you approve that supplier who's doing outsourced manufacture for you? Same three options, GFSI or an audit or a questionnaire. Yeah. And where processes are outsourced, got to include that in HACCP. So there's just a reminder. I would have assumed that you would have anyway. Corrective and preventive actions, a little bit more focus here on root cause and preventive actions under this section here. Site shall test the traceability system. Okay, so this is under traceability. Yeah, and they're saying here, now this is really interesting. They're saying here in terms of tracing the quantities and potentially having to do a mass balance does not apply to primary packaging. So they've taken the focus off primary packaging when it comes to testing the traceability system. Very interesting. But later on in the standard, we're going to find extra focus on mass balance of packaging. So hang on and you will see. Sorry, under control of non-conforming product here, they've reminded us about returns. That's really good because that was something that was quite often overlooked. Returns of stock, customer might reject it for whatever reason. Do we put it back in stock? How do we manage that? Yeah, so that must be considered within the procedure here. Okay. Moving on. Let's just close these for neatness. There we go. In the event of a significant incident, right, we no longer have to notify the CB directly. We must notify them via the BRC directory. So we're actually telling BRC, that's what they're saying here. tell BRC using the BRC directory, and that way the CB will know, and it's all formally managed through that process. That's quite good. Site standards. Policies and systems shall be in place to ensure that access to the site is controlled. Yes, this has been pulled up into this clause under 4.1, external standards and site security, and taken out of 4.2 where it used to be. Don't understand why, but that's where it is currently. Let's see if it stays there. They've changed site security to the term food defense, and they're using this term food defense everywhere. And they're focusing on team competence. So they're saying that this risk assessment, whoever's involved in it, must be competent. Areas where significant risk is identified must be controlled, of course, yes, but that's just a repeat really of what we saw already in 4.2.1. And here under layout and flow, they're giving us a heads up here on the fact that we have to risk assess the zones. So already here the focus is in terms of the site map, think about, and the risk assessment, here's the map, think about the production risk zones. Do we need high care, high risk, etc.? And that is then going to be repeated when we get to section 8. But they're giving us a flavor here saying this is where we must already think about it. And previously they talked about elevated walkways, and here they're saying also don't forget about the mezzanine floors. Plastic strip curtains, yeah, so this is in the section where they're talking about windows, doors, sufficient lighting, ventilation, and plastic strip curtains. Don't forget about those. And here utilities where water is stored, so holding tanks. That's nice, giving focus on holding tanks because of course they can develop biofilm, etc. Equipment, they're reminding us here to include a purchasing spec for new equipment, making sure that it's properly commissioned, and we've considered the environment when installing and commissioning it. So installation is another focus there. Focus on the suitability of the equipment in the first place in terms of cleaning, etc. And moving machinery around or moving equipment around, there must be a procedure in place. So that's quite good. So a lot more focus on that. Furthermore, how we store equipment that's not in use. Mobile equipment in particular, so where we're talking about forklift trucks, pallet trucks, scissor lifts, ladders, such mobile equipment. And particularly if we have to use it, move that mobile equipment out of the production environment, so outside and externally and then back in. So we need a risk assessment for cleaning, etc. And there's another clause there, or there's a new clause on battery charging equipment not being stored in open product areas. So quite a lot more there around equipment. We're not seeing validation. I would have expected to see validating equipment. But they have given a lot of focus on validation in HACCP, and later on you will see the focus on validation for changes to process, and that falls under 5.1 new product development. So we do see validation come in there, extra focus in HACCP, extra focus in change management, what I would call change management, but that's under product development. Maintenance. All they've done here is included the focus on that mobile equipment. Remember, that's forklift trucks, pallet trucks, scissor lifts, and ladders. Let's keep going. So chemical controls here, they're just giving some extra focus on managing spills and disposal, yeah, of chemicals, obsolete, out-of-date chemicals. Wood, if you're using wood as part of the process, the manufacturing process. So here, wood for food contact purposes shall be fit for purpose, and take into account wood treatments only in accordance with legislation, and the wood treatment must be approved for food use. Other physical contaminants. So previously there was just a focus on pens, but now they've included and similar portable items. So pens and other. must not pose a contamination risk. And that other is obviously what's allowed in the area. You wouldn't allow non-essential items in that area, like, for you to decide what that is. So we always had metal detection in there with a lot of focus on metal detection and managing test pieces, etc. But we didn't have such guidance on X-ray. So this basically mirrors what we've got for metal detection. There's nothing really significant in there. It's just elaborating on test pieces, etc. Challenging reject functions like we had previously for metal detectors. And for magnets, the focus is on final testing. So any magnets used for final product testing, so further down the line, not necessarily magnets that are used upstream that might be used for protecting the equipment rather than protecting the product. And I assume that that's where this is, that's the reason this is coming, is that the focus is on magnets used to protect the product. Then yes, we must do the strength testing, etc., etc. Housekeeping, let's see, what was this? Oh, other, a whole new section on other foreign body detection or removal equipment. Could be gravity separators, fluid bed technologies, aspirators. So they're acknowledging that there are other kinds of foreign body detection equipment out there, and they're just saying use it in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. CRP, they've just included here saying be aware if the CRP goes into the other production risk zones, so high care, high risk, for example. If you've got CRP going into those areas, consider the risks. And then they're giving us a lot more detail in section 8 on CRP in those areas. So we'll see that in a bit. Okay, nothing significant there. Okay, what was this? Yes, this is where you're using contractors. And if I just go up one, it's under dispatch and transport. Let's go back down. So where we're using contractors, this was always there, but it could have been misinterpreted, where the auditor could have said, oh, lovely, I see that they got GFSI certification, your hauliers that you're contracting to. That's lovely, but I also want to see a contract. Yeah, I always used to accept one or the other. And that's what they've done here in this new version. They're saying it can be one or the other. It does not have to be both. Okay, so GFSI or contract. And product design and development here, yes, they've elaborated here to say we've got to revert back to this process of product design and development whenever there's a change. So again, I would call that change management, and that's what they're saying here as well. We need a procedure for new product development, but that includes changes to existing products. It includes changes to packaging. It includes changes to the manufacturing process. Yeah, significant changes to manufacturing process should bring that product back to NPD. That's very good. Again, there's that change management. Let's go back down. Management of allergens. They're just saying here that this whole section 5.3 could be not applicable if the site is making pet food or animal feed. Could be, depends on the legal requirements in the country of sale. Or if there's any claims on the pet food or the animal feed, then it can't be ignored, of course. Okay, they're using the terms cross-contact, which reflects what we saw in version 5 of the 2020 update to Codex HACCP. And they're also including the term hypersensitivity over here in 537. But otherwise, no significant changes. Product authenticity, again, competence for the team. So we saw that clause under the sites, what we used to call site security, now they're calling food defense. Risk assessment must be by a competent team. Same thing here, 5.4, risk assessment by a competent individual or team. And here, where product is designed to enable a claim, awesome. Here we've got focus on validation. They're saying not only must we validate the formulation, but also validate the production process. Good, more focus on validation. So previously it was just substantiate the claim. We have to validate that we can always meet the claim. Product packaging. They're saying here, when you're purchasing primary packaging, make the supplier aware of any particular characteristics of the food that was always there, but also make them aware of any recyclable or reusable packaging that you're already using on the product. So tell them about the whole product and anything that could be impacted so that they can help you use the right packaging. Product inspection and testing, they've included here that your procedure must detail how you handle samples. Yeah, so a process for obtaining the samples, including their delivery to the lab. Yeah, so how you're going to handle all of that. Okay, and also testing and inspection results, where applicable, measurement uncertainty associated with lab results shall be considered. Yes, so how meaningful is that data? Take into account uncertainty. You might have to talk to the lab to understand that uncertainty. And we did always see in 643 the uncertainty of calibration, particularly where using equipment to test against critical limits for CCPs. So we saw uncertainty needing to be taken into account for equipment, calibration in particular. They're saying, yeah, bear in mind, there's also uncertainty coming from the external lab results. That can come from lots of different things. I'm not going to talk about the people, the calibration, test methods, but take that into account as well. Control production tests, yes. So what they previously said was, where you've got testing on site, control your test lab through segregation, etc. But they're also saying, where you're doing tests in production, on the line, for example, maybe they're rapid tests, we must consider the potential for contaminations. We've just got to control that. Located, designed, and operated to prevent contamination. Moving on to pet food and animal feed. So here we go. They've included animal feed, just like that. And they're saying here that take into account for both pet food and animal feed, any medicated materials. And the three things to focus on there is supplier approval for that medicated feed, in particular, training for the handling of that medicated feed and disposal of, sorry, not just feed, but medicated materials. Yeah, so supply approval, training, and disposal of those materials. And of course, meet legislation. There's so much legislation on animal feed that they've just covered all of that with one clause saying, if you're handling or making pet food or animal feed, meet the appropriate legislation for the country of sale. Animal primary conversion. Really, I don't know where that term exactly comes from, but it's slaughter. It's slaughter. And they're saying nothing significantly new here. All of this you would have expected a slaughterhouse to do in any case. Yeah, HACCP would have required a lot of this in any case. We always had this one in already, where the site is in receipt of live animals. You remember this was taken out of acceptance of raw materials out of that section to come into this section here. So we always had that. You would expect a risk assessment in any case for veterinary medicines, pharmaceuticals, or if it's fish, heavy metals, etc., things like that. So the risk assessment reflects what we would have expected for HACCP, but also under 3511, which is the big risk assessment for all our raw materials. But they've just given that extra focus by having a separate section, essentially. And then make sure that we've got traceability through the whole process, taking into account also time and temperature between slaughter and getting the temperature down for those products, whether they're chilled, frozen, or whatever. Okay, control of operations, change management. Yes, such a review the process, specs, and work instruction procedures prior to any changes which may affect food safety. That's still quite a vague statement, and for me that's again referring to change management. And we already saw in 511 that any significant changes to the manufacturing process needs to go through product development 511. So they're kind of hinting at that here again, saying review specs, work instructions before you make any significant changes to operations. Okay, where a site handles products or materials, okay, what products or materials, they don't tell us, but essentially they're byproducts from the production process, which are outside of the scope of the audit, control to ensure that they don't create a risk to the products that are within scope. They're not talking about waste, because that would be under waste. They're not talking about what we've covered in 4.1.3, where you could have materials that you supply to charity or byproducts that could be sent for animal feed, etc. So it's not that either, but it's anything else that could fall out of the scope of the standard. So it's not food, it's not pet food, it's not animal feed, because they all fall within the scope of this standard, if this goes ahead. So under labeling, reconciliation, yes. So it was interesting that under traceability and testing the traceability system, we don't have to do mass balance for the primary packaging. So the focus has been taken off there, but huge focus has been put on our daily production, where we do have to reconcile potentially, we process the labels. We have to reconcile the labels, just like they do in pharmaceuticals. They've always had to reconcile label numbers. Now, how detailed that has to be, let's wait and see. In pharmaceuticals, it's down to every single label being accounted for. Assuming it's not down to that level, but it's reconciling expected use and the cause of inconsistencies. I would imagine if we've used the wrong labels, this reconciliation would help to identify that. Hang on a second, this isn't adding up. So, gone in 393, focus here on our batch records having to reconcile labels. Okay, and under personal hygiene, here they said watches shall not be worn previously, and now they say and similar wearable devices. So I suppose Fitbits and things like that. We're getting there. Section 8, map of the site. They took all of this out because that was already covered in 4.3.2. And you remember I said they're giving us a heads up that already in 4.3.2 we have to consider the other higher risk zones, or the other risk zones. And yes, and they're saying here, have a map, just like we told you already in 4.3.2. So they took all the waffle out. Building fabric, removable walls. So previously they never acknowledged that there's such a thing as a removable wall, but particularly if you want to convert from high care to high risk or from other risk zones, and you've got these removable walls, they're just saying control them. That's all. Make sure that they're tight fitting and you can clean them, etc. And equipment used for cleaning, they're saying it must be, particularly, of course, we're still in section 8 here, so we're talking about high care, high risk areas. Equipment for cleaning must be hygienically designed and hygienically stored. Let's just focus on that. And of course, this CRP here, I already gave you a heads up when we looked at CRP under section 4. We did say that they told us they're already to consider CRP in other risk zones, and they're elaborating on that here as per 4.11.7.1. And it's just saying consider the flow and avoiding causing contamination in those higher risk zones where CRP goes into those areas. Okay, traded products. All they've done here is nothing new, just provided extra clarification on what they are, and they reminding us that you can't exclude some traded products and include some. You either include them all or you exclude them all. So if you've got traded products, if you've got a variety of traded products, they're either included in the scope of the audit or excluded. And of course, yet this is a brand new clause here. They're saying if you've got traded products, it's got to be covered by HACCP, either its own HACCP, which is going to be very simple because you've got no processing going on, or included under your existing HACCP for the products you do make. And if you've got traded products, then they're saying here about traceability. Make sure that you've got traded products in your traceability procedure, just in case the traceability for them is slightly different to your traceability for your own products that you make. And that's it. That's the end of the standard. Just in terms of protocol, a couple of interesting things to point out here. We've got 3 audit options. Announced, which is nothing new. We know that it's a GFSI requirement for the announced audits that every 3rd year is a mandatory unannounced audit. Yeah. So they're just telling us that here. Whereas previously we had that only in a position statement. Now it's in the standard, or it will be. The second option is a blended audit. So obviously they've saw the advantages of using technology to do partial remote auditing for the paperwork side, and they're sticking with it. So that's wonderful, wonderful. So it's possible to go for a blended audit. Obviously it's announced, and paperwork is remote using ICT, and the production facility is on site. Straightforward. However, if we choose that, we've still got to have every 3rd year being a mandatory unannounced audit. And you can't do an unannounced audit virtually, because you've got to tell them to join your meeting, and therefore it's announced. So you can't do, so that's mandatory every 3rd year is going to be unannounced, and it can't be blended. And then the third option is straightforward unannounced. But the super interesting thing here is that the criteria is the same as the mandatory. So previously, unannounced was auditor can show up in the last 9 months of the cycle, of the audit cycle. They could show up anytime in that last 9 months, and you got 15 days that you could block out. The mandatory every 3rd year being unannounced was slightly less stringent, where the auditor could only show up in the last 4 months of the audit cycle, and you could only block out 10 non-audit days. That's the same, but they've adopted those less stringent requirements for the normal unannounced audit program. Wow, I think that's quite significant. Yeah, I think it's quite significant. So the unannounced audit, there's no difference now. There's no difference between the two, whether it's simply the 3rd year being unannounced or whether every year is unannounced. The auditor is only going to show up at some point in the last 4 months of your audit cycle. Wow. And you can only block out 10 days within that 4-month period. Wow. I say wow because I can see a lot of people smiling at this and saying, awesome, I can handle that. And a lot more businesses will go unannounced, I think, which is a good thing. That's it. That is the draft. I shall say goodbye. Thank you.